Hi, I'm Greg Grant. I'm the Smith County Horticulturist for the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service in Tyler, Texas. Today we're going to talk about bulbs, planting time, different kinds, when to divide, that sort of thing. So we're at the Tyler Botanical Garden at the Tyler Rose Garden this morning. And first thing, let's clarify what we're talking about with bulbs. I'm sure everybody knows common bulbs. A true bulb, if you think onion, is pretty easy. True bulbs are actually storage organs made out of modified foliage. So if you think about cutting an onion to make onion rings out of, each of those rings in a true bulb is actually modified foliage. The tiny little base at the base of an onion, the part that the roots come off of, that's actually the stem of the plant. And of course the roots we generally don't have on an onion for cooking or on a dormant daffodil bulb. That distinguishes the three parts of a plant. So the roots, the stem at the base, what we call the basal plate on a true bulb, thinking our onion again, or a daffodil bulb like I'm holding here. And then the swollen storage portion, the foliage, makes up the bulk of the bulb. To be quite honest, in the horticulture industry, we call a lot of different things bulbs. So daffodils, lycoris, oxblood lilies, those are all true bulbs. Iris, Louisiana iris, bearded or German iris, those are actually, the storage organ is a stem, so those are rhizomes. And so a rhizome, instead of being modified foliage, is actually a modified stem. So here you have the foliage on an iris, the stem or the rhizome, and the roots coming off of that. Cannas are another example of a rhizome. Here you have the foliage, the rhizome portion is the stem, and then you'd see the roots. When you dry all these things down and they go dormant, you're just normally left with a storage organ. So you'd have just the rhizome or the bulb. In gladiolus and Montbretia or Crocosmia, the storage organ is called a corm, and a corm is actually made out of modified stem, much like a rhizome. So you have the foliage on top, the stem being the corm being the modified stem, and then the roots coming off of that. And the last one I'll mention to you would be daylilies. Daylilies aren't a bulb, they aren't a corm, they aren't a rhizome. They actually have swollen storage roots, and so these are called tuberous roots. And so daylilies have tuberous roots, not to be confused with true tubers like an Irish potato or a dahlia that we don't grow too much here. Those are actually modified stems. So in this case we're talking about modified roots. Bottom line is any plant that makes a flower for us, that makes a storage organ to store up food and energy to go dormant and to resprout in a different season, we're going to loosely call those bulbs. So even though they're not true bulbs, if they have a storage organ and can go dormant and come back, we're going to call those bulbs. And bulbs and bulb relatives are extremely important for Texas gardeners because, as you know, our climates go from feast or famine, a lot more famine than feast. And so if you have some way to go dormant, particularly during a drought, that's why these bulbs are sort of magical for us, because they can go dormant when it's dry and sprout when it's green. But really important for you to know are the seasons of bulbs, and we're pretty much going to break those down into two seasons. We're in the transitional season right now, so we're just headed into fall. Fall is the time to plant dormant bulbs, and so dormant bulbs because of drought and hot weather, and so we're starting the cool season now. It's really important in the plant world. We plant our shrubs and trees and vines going into fall. We plant our cool season vegetables going into fall. And we plant our cool season perennial bulbs. And so any bulb that makes its growth during the winter time when it's cool, that'd be late fall, all of winter, and early spring, those are cool season growing bulbs. And so that includes the fall bulbs and the spring bulbs. And so we say fall bulbs and spring bulbs, we're not talking about when they grow, we're talking about the bloom time, but right now we're talking about season. So anything that's just fixed to start its growth cycle, now is the time to plant them, including all our daffodils, jonquils, narcissus. That would include our oxblood lilies and our lycoris or spider lilies. They're at the beginning of their growth cycle. The summer bulbs, and if you think cannas and daylilies, we'll plant those at the beginning of spring. And so even though you're not messing up if you transplant them now or plant them now, it's not really the ideal time. So you plant your bulbs or your bulb relatives at the beginning of their growth cycle. And so that means before they start to grow, not necessarily when they bloom. So today we're going to show an example of planting some daffodil bulbs. We'll talk a little bit more about seasonality and how and why these things go dormant. Since we're headed into the cool season, fall, winter, and spring for all of us in Texas, that's the beginning of the growth cycle for our fall blooming bulbs and the spring blooming bulbs. So right now you'll be planting things like bearded iris, Louisiana iris, oxblood lilies and lycoris, and rain lilies. These are all plants that make their growth during the winter time. Now as you see, some of them make their bloom in the fall, then they make their growth. Some, like the daffodils and the narcissus and the jonquils, make their growth during the winter and the bloom at the tail end of the season. But they all make their growth during the winter time when it's cool and moist. So they're really the perfect xeriscape plants. They grow when it's cool and moist. They go dormant when it's dry. And so don't be confused about the bloom time. It's not when they bloom, it's when they make their foliage. So the fact that they make them when it's cool, you plant them now as we head into the cool season. I'll also mention multiplying onions, which are a winter growing crop that we've just harvested for the foliage, and so onions are another example of a cool season bulb. Question is always, where do I plant them? Number one, full sun for most of the bulbs. There are some that can tolerate shade, but if you're going to plant them in the shade, if you make winter foliage, that means you need to be under a deciduous tree. I wouldn't suggest planting them under a tree, but some people that's all you have. And so if you're planting daffodils, jonquils, narcissus, oxblood lilies, lycoris, rain lilies, you can put them under a deciduous tree like a red oak or white oak. You wouldn't want to plant them under magnolias, cedar trees, live oaks that have winter foliage, because that winter sun is extremely critical to the foliage. Very important to know on all bulbs, the bloom that you have this year are from last year's foliage. So to be successful with growing bulbs or blooming bulbs, it's really about farming foliage. So you're not responsible for the first year's bloom when you purchase a bulb. You're responsible for the next year's bloom and thereafter, and it all has to do with sunlight. So in this particular case, we're talking about winter sun. Full sun is best, and when we say full sun for any crop, that doesn't mean direct sun. That doesn't mean you have sunlight at 2:30 in the afternoon for 5 minutes. Full sun means a full day's sun, where the plant watches the sunrise in the east, watches it set in the west for a full day. Very few people have full days sun, so don't be confused by direct sunlight and full sun. So no such thing as too much sun for daffodils, jonquils, oxblood lilies, spider lilies. Next question is, how deep do we plant them? You'll see all sorts of things online, some of it right, some of it wrong. Oftentimes, some of it from very different parts of the world. So one reason they plant bulbs deeper in the north is because the soil freezes and they want to put them below the frost line. So in other words, if your ground freezes, oftentimes the soil heaves up and spits the bulbs out of the ground. We rarely have frozen soil in the lower 3/4 of Texas. And so the best rule I can give you for planting bulbs, as a general rule, you plant them twice the size of the bulb, or twice the height of the bulb. So in this particular case, I've got a jonquil bulb called Trevithium that's about 1 inch tall, so I'm going to plant it 2 inches deep. If in doubt, for the really good long-lived perennial bulbs in here that we grow here, you can't really mess it up. Another general rule I like to give beginning gardeners is, if it's brown, place it down. If it's green, let it be seen. And so if it's brown, that means it's made to grow out of the ground. If it has green on it, it means it's made to go above the ground. So the fact that all of this is brown, you don't leave any portion of it sticking out, you put it all under the ground. The green foliage is going to come up here. To be honest, on the long-lived perennials, if I plant this 1 inch deep or 5 inches deep and come back 10 years later, they're going to be at the same depth. So the really good adapted bulbs for Texas will adjust their height because they know how to grow, and it's about oxygen and moisture and that sort of thing. So you can't mess it up very bad. So the biggest rule of thumb right now is the cool season has started, fall is here. Don't sit around for weeks and weeks deciding where I'm going to plant my bulbs and how deep I'm going to plant my bulbs. Put them in the ground ASAP. When we get our first rains in the fall, when the oxblood lilies bloom, that's when all these things start to make their growth. They make their root growth first, then they make their foliage growth in the wintertime. In this case, they're going to make their flowers in the spring. So don't wait around like you're doing tulips and hyacinths and plant them in December and January. You wouldn't get them all planted preferably by October 1st if you can. So bottom line is, you're going to plant them about 6 inches apart if it's a true perennial, and that's the only kind of bulbs I grow. I don't do annual bulbs like tulips and hyacinths where you plant them and pull them up and throw them away. We're talking about bulbs that can grow and multiply, and they're almost always going to make clumps at least 6 inches wide, sometimes a foot wide over time. And so it's really just a matter of making a hole that you know is twice the depth of the bulb, putting the bulb in the ground. Now, to be honest, I could put a handful of these in the ground. It's going to make a thicker clump the first year, but these are really long-lived perennials. They're going to live the rest of my life. They're all going to make 1 foot by 1 foot clumps, and so I'm wasting bulbs by putting more than in one hole. Because if I put 6 of these across here, I'm going to have 6 1 foot clumps versus 1 1 foot clump that's going to look exactly the same size as these individual bulbs that I planted. So it's just a matter of putting it in, covering it up. If you can water it, that's fine. Otherwise, at some point we get moisture during the fall and winter here. They're dormant right now. You don't even have to water them. Pretty easy to do. Long-lived perennials. It's about knowing what to grow here. So you're always going to want to check with your local Master Gardener group, your local botanic garden, a good long-term independent nursery, even better, a super old gardener that's been gardening in your area a long time. That can tell you which bulbs really work and which ones don't. You can purchase bulbs from reliable sources. A great place to get them is swapping and trading from your fellow gardeners, because then you know for sure that those are proven performers. So let's take a step across the garden and talk about maintenance and care of bulbs in Texas. Here in Smith County, the Smith County Master Gardeners host their annual Bulbs to Bloom plant sale and conference each year, bulb sale. And we specialize, and always have for now 25 years, in heirloom, true perennial bulbs that fit our natural growth cycle here. So as far as I'm concerned, that's the only kind of bulbs we should grow in Texas. Those that grow during their proper season, go dormant during their proper season, and live forever without having to be sprayed, irrigated, dug, or divided. And so the best bulbs for Texas don't need irrigation. Matter of fact, the bulbs for Texas, unlike the bulbs for the north and Europe that work on a cold-warm cycle, which is why we have to chill tulips and hyacinths here, bulbs in Texas work on a wet-dry cycle. Say they go dormant when it's dry, generally the summertime, at least for the spring and fall bulbs, and then they grow when we have moisture. And so as I mentioned, the best time to plant them is at the beginning of the growing season. But to be honest, all of the truly adapted long-term perennial bulbs that we grow in Texas, the fact that they have storage organs, you cannot mess it up. And so if you need to dig and divide them during the wrong season, they're going to be fine. If you need to dig them in full bloom, they're going to be fine. That's the beauty of these plants. The worst thing that's going to happen if you dig your daffodils in full bloom, you dig your spider lilies in full bloom, you dig your cannas in full bloom, the worst thing that's going to happen is they might skip the first year's bloom and then bloom for the rest of your life, barring a disaster here and there. But you're always going to get more good years than you have bad years. But these are true perennials that are truly xeriscape plants. They're truly earth kind plants, and the ones that we grow here don't want to be watered, don't want to be fertilized, don't want to have pesticides, fungicides sprayed on them, and so they're almost the perfect plant. So say you have a clump of rain lilies. You could dig it when it's dormant during the summertime, hard to find. You can dig it when they're in full bloom in the fall, which is what I recommend. Actually, I dig almost all my bulbs in full bloom, including the daffodils and the jonquils and narcissus, because they're all up and I see what colors they are and they see when they are. I've got a bunch of dormant daffodils that I have to go home and plant right now, but I have thousands of other daffodils out there. And so there's about generally a better than 50% chance that I end up planting them on top of something else and chopping up something rare and precious. And so I generally do my digging and dividing on all my bulbs when they're in full bloom. I know where everything is, I know what the colors are, and then I can do my landscape painting and know exactly where everything is and what the color matches are. And so in the particular case, once you have these true perennial bulbs, they make nice big clumps. You dig them whenever you can get around to it. Dormant season is best, but if you need to dig them in full bloom, that's okay. And so this would have started as a single rain lily, maybe a decade ago. And look what we have here, 10 or 20 bulbs. I've dug up clumps of jonquils and daffodils and narcissus with as many as 75 bulbs in there. It started from a single bulb. So these are basically the best investments you could ever make. Imagine putting $1 in the bank and coming back as little as a decade or two later and having lots and lots and lots of dollars that continue to multiply with you never doing anything or even changing banks. And that's what happens. And so the beauty is you can take these things, pull them apart where you started with a single bulb. Then you have 20 bulbs. You plant those in 20 different places. You come back 5 or 10 years later, you might have 20 in each of those clumps. And so if you want to keep dividing, you can make lots more. But the beauty of the really adapted bulbs for Texas is you don't have to divide them. We're not talking about wimpy little things that you have to go in every 5 or 10 years to dig and divide. The true perennials here, you can leave the rest of your life and maybe the rest of your children's life and your grandchildren's life, and they'll just be a nice clump continuing to bloom every year. But if you need to dig and divide them, if you have a little hobby bulb farm like I do, if you have plant swaps and plant sales, you have garden friends, you dig them up, you pull them apart, everybody gets some, and then they continue to multiply and divide and you keep sharing. And so good thing is you can't mess it up. You might not do it by the textbook, but it really doesn't matter. As long as they live, which you grow the right bulbs here, they're going to, you're going to have lots to share forever. So if you get a chance, come visit us here at the Tyler Botanic Garden. You can see the bulbs that I grow, the Smith County Master Gardeners grow. If you get a chance, show up each October at our Bulbs to Bloom conference and sale that we hold.